So good to be here, and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I think the question is really how do we stay afloat in the new normal? And the way that I was going to deal with this is three ways. One is what exactly is the new normal going to be? And then how do we stay afloat in this as individuals, as team members, and as leaders? To say, ask a quiz. I have to follow in my daughter's footsteps. So all of you can respond. You can unmute yourself. The question is very simple, just a one-word answer. You can type it in the chat or you can just voice it out because there's such few of us. What do you think this new normal is going to be like? So unpredictable. Okay, that's a great answer.
I think it will be a little more flexible, wherein we will have an opportunity to work in a hybrid model. And a lot of us can take work from wherever we are at the moment.
I think you'll be working more remotely.
Okay, you hope or you think?
That's what I've been observing. So
I think, like as everyone said, it's just going to be a mix and match of a little bit of everything, where you're working from home on most of the days, wherever you're required to be in person. I think that's when you're going to meet with everyone.
So you're absolutely right, all of you. It is going to be unpredictable. Nobody really knows. It's a bit like stargazing, like science fiction. Who knows what the new world is going to be like? But assuming that we do get into a more face-to-face environment, having seen that this workplace is productive, even when we're working remotely, chances are that that workplace will be a hybrid workplace. But unlike now, when we're working from our bedrooms or our living rooms or our kitchens, I mean, I've seen some people working from their bathrooms because they have no space, or working from a closet. So, instead of that, people might be able to go to a coffee shop or to a work center or to a friend's house and work there. So working remotely, as you said, is likely to be more possible than impossible. People are going to accept that remote working will create productivity anyway. But the remote type of working will be more different. It won't be so isolated. However, this is not true for all organizations. So from an individual's point of view, if I want the flexibility of working remotely, then I need to choose the job that I want to do. I want to choose my qualifications very carefully. Even in an educational institution, you all know that I work for Harvard. It's very easy for a research person like me, a researcher, to work remotely. But for people who are teaching in the classroom, like a professor, you probably need to go into class. And even if the professor, because of who he is, says, I'm going to teach remotely, he's beamed in, etc., the guy who's actually opening the classroom, cleaning the blackboards, the IT folks who are creating the support systems in that classroom, they need to go to work. So depending on what you want in your life and what the definition of afloat is, you need to choose the type of job, the type of organization, and therefore the type of qualifications and type of experience that you garner. So afloat makes me think of little boats. And, as Chirag said, this is unpredictable. The ocean has got a storm going. And hopefully all the boats will stay afloat and will bob around. But the smaller boats are more flexible, they're more nimble. The bigger boats, the steamships, etc., sometimes they can't turn, they get overturned. So you need to think about what type of a boat you are. And in these unpredictable seas, what type of qualifications and buildings and what type of an environment you want to build for yourself. Another way of looking at this is that we've always thought of productivity as a definition of a job outcome. And unfortunately, most companies still think of productivity as a job outcome. And they'll say, how many hours did, especially in financial services organizations. Many of you know that I worked for a long time at banks. Say, when did you clock in and when did you clock out? And they have all these systems by which they monitor attendance and FaceTime and so on. And nobody really cares how much work you've done while you're there. They don't monitor that at all. And that's the way they look at productivity. Now that is changing. So the good news about this is that organizations have realized that we need to have more than a productivity measure. to see how people are doing. And nobody has ever talked as much about mental health and emotional health as they have now. The good news is that rather than this just being a fluffy topic, in 2017, Harvard University actually created something called the Flourishing Index. So this was done much before the pandemic. And if you look it up in Harvard University, you'll find it, Flourishing Index. Don't start Googling right now, Chirag. But this Flourishing Index talks about the fact that there's wellness and well-being. And physical well-being is something that everybody knows about. Everybody knows about physical wellness. You have gyms, you have cafeterias which serve nutritious food. I remember 20 years ago, or maybe 30 years ago, when in France, when my husband used to go there, there would be these fabulous cafeterias which served healthy food. So that focus on a gym, on physical wellness has been there in companies for a long time. Some companies even pay for a physical checkup every year. But companies are now looking at mental and emotional well-being. And the Flourishing Index talks about it. So one is that a company should be having the Flourishing Index and they should put it in. But you as an individual can look at the Flourishing Index and think about whether those things, it's got some 30, 40 questions, whether those questions apply, how do those questions apply to you? What are you doing about physical, emotional, and mental health? And, I attended a very nice session with Renuka Ramnath yesterday. I don't know how many of you know, Renuka is a very well-known investment banker. She runs a company called Multiples. And she was talking about balance. And somebody asked her a question, what is work-life balance? And, how do you flourish and so on? And she said, work-life balance is something that has to be defined for each person. And she said it openly. And, Renuka is a good friend of mine. She's told me this before, that for her, work is very important. Work is her first priority. She said, when I work and when I do good work and then I come home, I'm happy. And then I can look after my family and I can do this and I can do that. But she says, if I don't have a good day at work and if I'm not productive and I don't deliver what I need to do, I'm very unhappy when I come home and I can't support my family. And, she lost her husband very young. So she brought up 2 kids as a single mom. But both her children have turned out really well. Her parents, her friends, her family. I mean, somebody like me, she's always available for me. So she does have balance, but she identified what was important for her. The Flourishing Index will help you identify what's important for you. And that is one way that we can individually stay afloat. So there were 3 things. The first is, from this point of view, what are jobs going to be like? What's the environment going to be like? And therefore, if I need a flexible work environment, what type of a job do I choose? And how do I flourish in this new work environment, in this new hybrid work environment? The second aspect is from the office design point of view. Some of you are working in offices which are already designed for you. Some of you will grow and will become team leaders where you will be able to design the office. Now, the offices so far have been designed based on office design. And I'm going to give a very old example. Some you all are so young, you don't even remember it. But when I started off working, there were no ATMs. You had a you had a human being sitting at the counter, and he would give cash in the bank to you. So when the ATMs were introduced, the machine replaced the teller, but the machine sat in the same place as the teller, and you had to go all the way inside the bank and reach that machine. And then we discovered, our customers told us that, listen, I am getting parking tickets because I leave my car outside. I want to just dash in and dash out. When the bank was shut, you couldn't access the ATM. The whole idea of an ATM was you could do 24/7 banking, but you couldn't access it because it was inside the bank, right? Hidden somewhere right at the back. So one of my first jobs was to design the branches so that for the customers. And that's an example of a human-centered design. Now, all of you must have seen ATMs which are in a wall. They're not even inside the bank. So earlier it was designed for the office and the bank and the processes and the security, and then it was designed for the customers. And now we need to think about designing for employees. So that human-centered office design, which has been an old story, it's been around for years. And some of you, like Chirag, who've seen the HBS office in Bombay, will see how it is human-centered design. In most offices, when you go in, all the big shots are sitting along the wall and they've got all the windows, and all the poor little tiny shots are sitting in the center, and they don't have light and they don't have air. But the HBS office was designed keeping our human employees in mind. where all the windows, the light and air is available for everybody inside the office. And the conference rooms, where anybody, when you're sitting in a conference room, you make it dark so that you can see your PowerPoints, was along a wall which didn't have any windows. That concept of human-centered design is what we now need to bring back into offices. And you don't need to spend a lot of money for it. In your own workspace, how can you create human-centered design? How can you have art? How can you have music? How can you have plants? How can you make your own little space more friendly, whether it's at home, whether it's in a coffee shop, whether it's in the office? And it might just be a little pen stand that you carry around with you, which tells you that you started working. Or it might be a potted plant which you carry around with you, which you water and which you look after. Or it might be a fake plastic plant, which reminds you that there's more to life than this. I used to have 3 little dice. I love cards, and I love mahjong, and I love these games. I don't play for money, but I love them. So I used to have these 3 dice on my desk, which reminded me that life is a gamble. You never know what's going to happen. And, a toss of the dice can change your life. So this is called human-centered design. It's not only about desks and so on. The third thing is really about our own personal qualities. So I've talked about the human being, I've talked about the physical space, and now I'm talking about the last piece, which is about what are those qualities? So again, I'm going to ask a quiz. What do you think will be the single most important qualities? Each one will have different ideas, but what do you think will be the difference between a great leader, a great team player, a great individual contributor? What are those qualities, human qualities, which will be important? You can just type it into the chat, or you can just or you can just speak it out, whoever wants to.
As a leader, I would think that the leader has to look beyond, and the way of leading will also change. It's not anymore about like people aren't really interacting much in person. So they'll have to be more, I would say, introspecting into their leading style as well. And as long as how people are also growing, because it's really important to learn and grow, especially if you're a fresher and you're learning for the first time. So I guess the people at the top have to put in a lot of effort. As an individual, I guess we'll have to be more disciplined. Like, this is something that I lack, that I've been fortunate enough to work from office for like 6-7 months. And as a person who likes to learn, like my learning style is learning on the job. So I found it really hard to, especially in the 2 months of the lockdown again, to adapt. So I guess being adaptive is also one thing. So yeah, according
That's
to
great.
me.
That's great, Sakshi. That's a great point. In fact, the word adaptive has been used by both Prakhar and Niharika. And in fact, Sinhali has used the word proactive. So, and then of course, Niharika has said we should be aware. Anybody else who wants to add in one more word? Communication and keeping everyone on the same page now that we are working remotely. Nyanal says that. Aanchal says communication, and then effective communication and empathy. Aditya. So Aditya, I really think that you hit it, because all these words are sort of encompassed in this one word, which is empathy, which is like Sakshi was talking about the fact that she found it difficult. If she had an empathetic boss who understood that it was difficult for her, she would have felt better. And so that ability to see what is not being shown, to hear what is not being said, to understand what is not being revealed, that empathetic ability is something that we can develop as individuals and as leaders and as team players. All of us can do it. It's not easy. And I'm the last person to talk about it because I don't have it really. I don't do it very well. But, we attended a wedding celebration or an engagement celebration recently. And it was great fun, and people were there from all over the world. It was on Zoom, of course. And at the end of it, my husband told me, he said, I think the grandmother was feeling a little unhappy and a little left out, and she hadn't been given enough importance. I hadn't picked it up. And he picked it up on Zoom, and he was so right. Because then when I sort of checked in, I discovered that she was really upset and really angry because she had not been given the status that she needed to be. He picked it up over Zoom. So that empathetic ability Whether you're an individual, whether you're a team player, whether you're a leader, whether you're just in your family, in these hybrid workplaces become much more important. So consciously focusing on that. We all know that communication is important. We all know that being adaptive is important. We all know that being flexible is important. So these are things that we work on anyway. And empathy is one part of communication. So it's a very important skill to develop to remain afloat in the new normal. Because when you are empathetic, you put yourself in the other person's shoes and you don't hold grudges, you don't take insult, you don't become unhappy, you don't hang on to things and not forgive other people because you're thinking about the other person. And that is a great way to stay afloat. You know, what happens in a boat? If the boat is overloaded and there's a storm, what do? They throw stuff out. And empathy is one way of throwing out all that rubbish that we hang on to. Because people don't think about empathy in that way. They think it's about thinking about the other person. But if you're thinking about the other person, you don't have time to hang on to a lot of stuff of your own. So empathy really begins with dropping all those grudges and all those stupid, oh, that person was rude to me. Oh, that person said this. Oh, that person said that. And saying, what's happening in that person's life? Why is that person snapping? What's going wrong with you? What's going wrong in your life that you are behaving like this, rather than, oh God, she's so rude. He's so rude. My boss isn't whatever, SOB because he's done this, that, and the other. Excuse the language. I forgot this was being recorded. So those were the three things. First is that the new normal is going to be hybrid and we are going to have flexibility. But if you're in the wrong job, baby, you're not going to be able to have that flexibility. So if you want it, choose the right organization and choose the right job. Because even in financial services, you have companies like Goldman Sachs, which are saying everybody has to get to work. I don't care. If you're a dealer and you are dealing in milliseconds, you need to be at work. You cannot work remotely. If you're an IT person who's handling infrastructure, you need to be at work. You cannot do that remotely. So the first is the new normal is hybrid. Choose your job, choose your talent carefully. Look at the flourishing index as a boss, as a team player, as an individual to see what makes up flourishing. The second piece is about human-centered design rather than office design. And the third is about what style of leadership, what individual personal skills do we need to develop. And you don't need to wait to be a boss to develop empathy. You can be empathetic as an individual. You can be empathetic towards your boss, towards your team players, towards your family. If you practice this all the time and you drop all that rubbish that you're carrying, your boat will stay afloat, even in the most turbulent waters. I'm ready to take questions. So any of you who have any questions, please go ahead.
That really does give us a lot of perspective of what's going on and how should we actually deal with not just an external, in our external relationships rather, but also how we internally manage the emotions that we have for ourselves. But would you say that the same rules that apply for external communication when you're talking about a boss or a friend apply to your family as well? Because one of the things that this pandemic did essentially was to kind of push everybody together into one small room. Essentially, that's something we're not used to, and I'm not saying that from with a negative connotation. Rather, I'm just saying that that's something that we've kind of been forced into without any form of preparation whatsoever. And when you're thinking about 4 individuals, different age groups, different mindsets in one room. That's how, of course, the pandemic began. That's really, a very good source of entertainment and mess ups, right? So I'm just trying to understand if the rules that apply for external empathy with your boss, with your colleagues, with your friends also applies to the family, or should that instead be similar to what you have for yourself? So should that be how you manage your emotions? Should you kind of prioritize that as well? Because this is quite a different, social situation compared to work, where there's a limit that you understand at work, but probably not with the family. So that's my question to you.
So I do have a point of view on this, Chirag, but I'd like to hear if anybody else has an answer for Chirag. It's a very good question. Aditya, you're nodding. Do you want to say something? No, you're not. You're nodding this way, not this way. All right.
I was agreeing to the point that it's a good question.
Oh, you agree that it's a great question. Anybody wants to add to what Chirag has said, either to respond to him or to give their perspective?
If I got the question right, you are basically asking if you should be empathetic towards your family or not. Is that the question?
Well, I mean, we are empathetic towards everybody at a point of time, and this is more so after overcoming our internal limitations. But what I'm trying to understand is where exactly in the hierarchy of importance when it comes to giving that kind of mental space for that person. So I rank it, say, self, family, work. Is that how I should keep it? Should it be me and work, and then with a long gap, then work? How should that kind of be placed? Because see, these dynamics aren't something we used to. Of course, this is a big debate, yes.
Yeah, I think personally, you should decide how you want to rank things. Like Anjali ma'am was just talking about that her friend prioritizes her work over her family. That's what keeps us sane. So similarly, I think you should prioritize whatever works for you. I think being empathetic is great, right? But someone like me, who for a very long time was like, was so empathetic, like who was always like, I need to think about the other person, I need to be, I need to let go and all that. It just it wasn't that great, because like all the time you're just thinking about the other person and you just forget that how you are feeling about things and how you should react, and you don't communicate with other person, right? You're just sitting in a chair and you're going like, okay, I understand you, and okay, fine, I let it go. That doesn't help either. So you definitely need to be empathetic, but you also sort of need to realize that, okay, you can't do more than this, right? I don't think to understand a person, you need to completely bury yourself alive. You need to like and I think communication is the key in any kind of relationship. That's what I personally feel. So just sit down with that person and be like, I think the starting line could be, I understand what you're going through. Probably I've been through the same. If you have a similar experience, you could go like, I've been through this and this is what I did to come out of it. Because if someone comes up to me and says that, I'm dealing with depression, obviously it wouldn't be nice to go like, okay, I don't know what you're talking about, get help, or be like, dude, like, don't make shit up, like I don't have time for this and all that. It would be nice to say that, oh, okay, I've not been through this, how are you feeling, and if I can help you in any way and all that. So that's great. But beyond a point, I can't help him or her, right? Professionally or even personally, because I have not been through that experience. I don't know what to say beyond a point. So you need to sort of understand that, okay, you can understand a person till a certain extent and you can help them out, but after that point, they need to figure it out.
Very well said. Very, very well said. And so I'm going to give you an image. What happens is that think of ourselves as oil lamps. And as an oil lamp, what happens is that you're giving light to a lot of people, which is maybe the empathy. But if the oil lamp is not replenished with oil, it's going to stop burning and it will stop giving light. So Chirag, the answer is that as you think of yourself as an oil lamp, you will take the time to replenish yourself, and then you will be able to give light to others. And what is that internal replenishment of the oil? So in life, we think of things as when we start with, when I have this much money, or I have this job, or I have this qualification, or I have this spouse, or I have this baby, or I have this house, whatever, then I need that to be happy. And so I will do all this. I will work hard and I will study and I will be nice to people and I will marry the right person and so on. And then I'll be happy. So it's have. We think about have, what we need to have. Then we do certain things and then we think we'll be happy. But if you start, actually life is the other way. You need to be first. When you are centered, at peace, devoid of grudges, giving, loving, mentally secure, emotionally secure, then you do things in a certain way. You build relationships in a certain way. You have the energy to work. You have the energy to exercise. You have the ability to act in ways which get you everything you want. When we can think about it from a point of view of study. When we are mentally at peace, when we are totally concentrated, then we can concentrate and we can work at our education, and then we can get our degree. But if we are mentally distracted all the time, and we're worrying about whether we'll pass or whether we'll fail, whether we'll reach school, whether my classes will be held, whether I will be able to get admission, then I don't have the time to study. So we need to start by looking at our being, which is looking at ourselves as an oil lamp. And what is the oil we're putting in it? Now, if you put good oil, you'll give off a fragrance and the oil lamp will burn for a long time. But I've never forgotten, once when I was doing Diwali, I didn't know I put kerosene in the diya. And I almost burnt the house down. It was the wrong oil. Not that kerosene doesn't burn, but it's not the right oil to put in a diya. You need to put ghee. You need to put an oil which is slow burning. We put clarified butter in the diya for the right reason, because it takes a long time to burn. It gives off for a long time. You don't need to keep replenishing. So what are those activities which enable you to be? And that is going inside. So it's a very deep question that you all have asked. There's no happiness outside. It's all within ourselves. And if you are happy within you, then you can reflect that outside. That's what Renuka was saying. She termed it in a way that we all said, it's work. She was working all the time and all that. But in work, she's very empathetic. She's very driven. She's very loving. She's very caring. That's why she has this huge network of people. She is a very being. Her being is she's got high integrity. She's got high empathy. She's got high care. She's a very good, the center is good. That's the being. Then she did all these things. She, worked hard. She started the ICICI Ventures. She went ahead and started multiples. Because of her good relationships and the work that she had done all her life, she got a lot of money. People, the government of India, eight government of India institutions said, "Madam, here's a check. You don't need to do anything. We know who you are." It was because of her being. So think of ourselves as oil lamps. Like I was talking about, think of yourself as a boat. And what type of boat do you want to be? And make sure you're light and you can bob and you can take the uncertainty and don't hold on to stuff. Similarly, think about your being and think about what type of oil you're putting inside yourself. Is it the clarified butter or is it the kerosene? And the clarified butter will burn for a long time, will perfume the world around you, will give you love and affection inside yourself, make you happy, and you will light up the world. So we are born happy. And the happiness is inside ourselves. I mean, this is maybe not the right thing to say in this forum, but we are all divine. We have the divinity inside ourselves. And the only thing that is permanent is that divinity. The rest of the world is impermanent. Today you have a job, it's making you happy. Tomorrow something happens to that company, you will be in that company and not be happy. Like I was at Citibank, I loved it. I enjoyed myself thoroughly. And then, Citibank was bought by Travelers. There was a financial crisis, and the same job which had given me so much happiness, so much excitement, just became stressful. I was like that oil lamp which had been totally burnt out. I had given too much to my people, my team. I was running a lot of big teams, and I was just finished. So it was not that job. Things change. And therefore, being centered inside yourself, meditating every day for 5-10 minutes, reflecting on reading a good book, reflecting on what actually matters, is actually the way to be happy. Because when we look outside ourselves, it's like looking at the sunset. If you look at the sunset over the mountains, the reflection of the sunset and the mountains, it's beautiful. It's all orange and all that. But when you turn around and see the real sunset, it's a different color. And I'm talking about this because we go to the mountains a lot. And in the mountains, the sun sets obviously in the west over the rivers. But when you look at it across on the mountainside, which is east, the setting sun is beautiful and you see the reflections and everything. But then when you turn around and see it actually setting in the west over the rivers, it is even more beautiful. It's like that. When we look outside ourselves, we do think that the job, the money, the spouse, the child, the food, will give us happiness. But it's a pale shadow. It's a pale reflection of the happiness that you get inside yourself. Sakshi, one way of looking at this is giving yourself a break. I've worked now for 40 years, maybe longer. I don't want to tell you how old I am, but there have been many times in my career when I was very up, flying high, and there were times when I was in such a deep trough, I cannot tell you. I have seen, the Harshad Mehta scam, I've seen the financial crisis, the Twin Towers, the internet bubble, all sorts of things happening. And so the thing that keeps you sent at that time, once this was going on, I had no work because there was no budget to pay for the work that I did. I used to be the training head and they said, there's no money to do training. So what did I do? I used my time to work in the community. And I did stuff for Bombay City. And so many of these parks that you see, Chowpatty, which is cleaned, the beautiful Otters Park, the park along Kulaba, all those parks were done because of my community work. I facilitated meetings for the whole of Bombay with 1,200, 1,400, 1,500 people, all the politicians, everything. I would never have been able to do it if I had been working full time like I was at City with all the money. So I continued with my job at City. And for those 2 or 3 years when there was no money, I did that. So Sakshi, sometimes these opportunities, these boulders, these obstacles which come in our way, give us time to do something else. Chirag knows how much I used to travel. And when the pandemic occurred, Ishan and I were saying, my husband and I were saying, we haven't traveled for the last 40 years, we have never been in the same place. And now for the last 2 years, we've been in the same place, as Chirag said, with the same people all the time. That's an opportunity. Many of my friends are grumbling and upset and unhappy, and they say, I can't wait to travel, and all sorts of things. And both of us have actually taken it as an opportunity to enjoy each other, enjoy being with the family, build our health, exercise, have a routine. So it is really, Sakshi, about looking inside you, looking at the door, looking at the obstacles and saying, what does this give me a chance to do?
I've asked a question.
Yes, I saw that Shweta saying, what if you can't slow down? I'm finding it hard to read a book these days unless I switch off my laptop and go to a different space entirely. How many of you are finding it difficult to switch off your phones, switch off your laptops, switch off your media? Yes, I can see Sakshi is doing that. Anybody else? Oh, yeah, even Pavan. Okay. Oh, even Sri. Sri, if Shweta's on her phone, you also have to be on your phone. Nyanal is also laughing. She's too polite to say this. So I 100% agree. It's very difficult. Even Shama is saying that she finds it difficult to switch off her phone and so on. And, the temptation is it's just next to you. So, can I just look at it? Or I'm trying now that you said it, I'm saying, where's my phone? Where's my phone? I can't find my phone anywhere. I'm getting panicked. So it is just a habit. It is really a habit. I try and give myself 20 minutes to meditate every day. I get up in the morning. The first thing I do is have a bath. And, you know, there's a reason, a psychological reason for this, because you wash off all the tamas of the night. And I do not touch my phone for 15 minutes, for 15, 20 minutes. But there are times, there are pockets. Okay, guys, I'll give you, of course, I'm from Harvard, so I have to give you something. There's a lady called Ashley Willens, and I'll send that her name on the, I'll ask her, I'll give it to Nyanal and she'll share it with you. She's written a book called Time Smart. It's a very easy read. And she talks about take 10 minutes, 15 minutes and layer your time. So, you know, you can't be off your phone, you can't be off your laptop, you can't be off this all the time, but give yourself 10 minutes every day at the same time. When you're having your coffee, after your breakfast, just before you sleep at night, give yourself 10, 15 minutes and layer that time. What does that mean? That means like, I used to, when my granddaughter was really tiny and she used to sleep a lot, I used to sit with her when she was asleep. And I used to do my emails at that time. And I would get stressed because I was, you know, some work email would come or something. When this professor and I met and we chatted, she told me about layering. What I started doing at that time was listening to music. I never had a chance in my entire life to listen to music. I never had the time. But Naisha was sleeping, I would put on my headphones and listen to music. And instead of doing emails, I started writing in my gratitude journal. You know, those 10, 15 minutes, those were so wonderful. They became so beautiful, such a time that I looked forward to. Then I started drinking tea at that time, sipping my tea, listening to beautiful meditative music, not Bollywood music, but, you know, lovely music, lovely meditative music, writing in my gratitude journal. Because I was writing in my gratitude journal, during the day, I would look at things and say, oh, you know, this is so beautiful. I would take a photograph. So I enjoyed the moment that was happening. And then the next day, I would put it in my gratitude journal. So I would remember that. I became so addicted to these 10, 15, 20 minutes that then I started listening to music when I was having a shower, having a bath. So the music, which I started realizing I really enjoyed, I started finding different times, and I have the same music at different times. So this is not about saying, I will not do my laptop. It is about what do you replace it with? And that is the time layering. It becomes such a beautiful 15, 20 minutes that then you realize the value of that and you recreate it. I now do it again at the end of the day. At the end of the day, before, you know, about 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, everybody's finished, you know, the day is over. I lie down for 10, 15 minutes. I might go back to work because, you know, I work nights. So I might work at 10 o'clock or whatever, but at 9 for 15 minutes, I will listen to some soothing music. I will read a good book. I will, you know, and as the layering of that time becomes beautiful, you start doing more and more of it. So it's a long answer to a short question.
When we used to work in offices, it was easier to make friends with people who you work. But since we're working remotely, most of our interactions are work related. I would like to understand how you've been managing getting the friendly interaction or the social interaction component into your schedule. Are you separately scheduling time with people, or how are you managing it with your colleagues?
You know, I am without mentioning my granddaughter. So I'm old. You know, like I am in the wrong side of 60. So I have many friends. So yes, I've already made my friends, and I'm in touch with all of them, and I schedule time separately with them. I'm also extremely social. The first employee of Talarang was recruited by me in an elevator. And everybody laughs because they say, Anjali will talk to everybody. She will find out somebody's life history in an elevator, 30 seconds. So you can imagine, for such a social person, to not meet strangers is a problem. See, I have lots of friends. I'm in touch with all of them. I do all that, Aditya. Regular calls, regular meetings, regular parties, everything, all on Zoom. I've not met anybody but my family for the last 18 months. But I miss strangers. So what I did was, I I created a group with a friend of mine called Uplifting Soul Stories. I also don't like gossip. I don't like negative stuff. I don't like politics, So this Uplifting Soul Stories is a WhatsApp group. And we, 5-7 of us invited, or 2 of us actually, and then now 5-7 of us, we invited our friends. And on that group, you're not allowed to say anything negative. You can only put uplifting stuff, which is about the soul. Stuff which makes you feel good. The most odd people are on it, like my mother, who's 87. Many of my friends from Citibank, many of my friends from Grindlays, many of my friends from Indian Institute of Management, from CAL, from IIM. And they share these stories about themselves or about uplifting stuff. And we've become friends. I've got to know people. Firstly, I've reconnected with people whom I didn't know all that well when we were in school together. Some of my school friends are on it or working together. And some of them are new friends. They'll talk about giving or something, and the post will be wonderful. You're not allowed to write back on that group and say free, great, and all that. If you can say something, but you can deal directly with those people if you want. I've made new friends, Aditya. So can you make new friends? Yes, but around what? Some people are into trading, day trading. So some of my friends have made friends around that new hobby.
But at work, how do you make?
At work, I deal personally with everybody. So we celebrate all our festivals. And we have recruited people who are new, like we've onboarded people from China, people from America who can't come here, but we talk to them morning and evening. And we not only deal with work, but we also chat. So we say if there's a Zoom meeting, we will start 5-10 minutes early. We open it 10-15 minutes early. And we will say how it's like a coffee shop, Oh, how's life? What are you doing? Share your photographs. So there's 10-15 minutes of chitter chatter. You can even do it on the chat, but you also do it like we're talking. And then you start the meeting. And then after the meeting is over, you continue for another 10 minutes and say, anybody wants to stay back, and you chat about it. And that Shweta taught me, because we started doing it in our family. I would run the family meetings like, we start on time and you end on time. And she said, like, people want to hang on. So, Aditya, to my horror, some of those family meetings go on for 2.5 hours. And I'm saying, who can become the host? I want to go to bed.
Wait for you guys to leave so that the cousins can catch up. That's what
Yeah.
we do.
But I do it at work, Aditya. And we just had this meeting with Renuka yesterday, where we had 45-50 people from HBS, all alums come together. And we started 15 minutes early. And everybody said, hello, this, that. And then we stayed on for 15 minutes after the formal meeting was over. And you get to make friends with people who you are connected to in some way or the other, but you get to know them better and you get to know them deeper. So just like in a party, in a face-to-face party, you would spend time on these personal things. That's where the empathy comes in. You need to spend time on that. I'm going to go back to the word empathy, because this is not really I'm so sorry. This is not really about boundaries and all that. There's a difference between empathy and sympathy. In sympathy, you are giving, it's this is the gesture, you're giving to somebody. In empathy, it is from the mind, it is from the intellect. And you acknowledge through your intellect the fact and the feeling. So somebody who's depressed, you don't need to have been depressed to empathize with that person. To sympathize, you need to say, yeah, I'm so sorry, I was like that. But for empathy, you say, I can understand that you're feeling low because you lost somebody who's close to you, or you haven't got the job that you want, or your boss has been nasty to you. So you use the words, this is the fact, and you name the feeling. I understand you're feeling low. I understand you're feeling high. I understand you're feeling sad. I understand you're feeling anxious. I understand. You identify the right emotion and you identify the fact that has caused it. And you don't even have to say, I understand. You say you are feeling anxious because the exams are around the corner. So and the person will say, no, I'm not feeling anxious. I'm feeling irritated. that's the power of empathy, because the person will tell you the right emotion. So that's a formula.